One of the most common arguments against atheism is that we can't have objective morality, so we can have no reason why we ought to do something good and why we ought to do something bad. Most people that believe in God say that atheists can be moral, they have the capability of doing good things, but they have no reasoning on which they should do those good things. But is that really true? So before we start, we have to actually talk about what morality is and why it's useful. Looking at it from a naturalistic point of view, we can see that morality has been extremely useful in our species development as a social species, as we work together to build a tribe or society or community.
If humans are animals, then where does our sense of morality, justice, and sense of right and wrong come from?
That's actually pretty easy, and it's covered by biology because cooperation is a survival strategy. And we see this survival strategy being applied across multiple species that are very social. The more social the species, the more cooperation that is required.
It was vital for us to know what things we should do and what things we shouldn't do in order to cooperate with each other and progress our tribe. Now, first, this morality started at a very basic level where we were just empathetic towards our own in-group, our own tribe or family or community, and everyone else outside of that tribe was an enemy. So when we first developed a sense of morality, it was just centered around our group, our family, our tribe, so we can help each other out and we can keep each other safe and we can progress our tribe. But as we saw other tribes working together and seeing that being nice to other tribes and doing good things with each other is actually very helpful to the development of our species, we realized that these selfish desires to do bad and gain short-term pleasure were actually not as beneficial as cooperating with other people, being nice to other people, and doing good things, so that more progress and more benefits can be gained from it. So if we think about it, this objective morality got ingrained into us as a species, that certain actions like murder, rape, and stealing were all very bad actions. As a species, it was better to agree on all these things than not to. And if we think about it in terms of natural selection, the tribes that didn't agree on these things, that all made their own morality, ended up getting wiped out because they couldn't actually agree with each other on their moral stance, and they ended up justifying murder or stealing from one another, which ended up destroying their tribe. So having this ingrained sense of objective morality in us has been extremely helpful in a naturalistic viewpoint to help our species progress more. Now, one of the biggest parts of morality is empathy. Empathy was crucial in the development of morality towards other human beings. Empathy allowed us to put ourselves in the position of the other person and see whether our actions are wrong or not. See whether we would like those actions done unto us. And because of the fact that we all agreed on these objective moral standards, we started to believe that since everyone believes this must come from an outside source, not from within us. But if we take a good long look at history, we can see that these things definitely did come from us. It just evolved over time. And now that we've progressed to a point where we're all sharing it, because of naturalistic explanations and natural selection, we believe it to be objective and that everyone believes it. And that is because the only people believing it are the only people remaining. The people that didn't believe in objective morality or didn't agree with the same things that were immoral got wiped out very quickly. But then we sat down and thought about, why does everyone share this sense of right and wrong? And back when we didn't have any knowledge about natural selection, we didn't have any knowledge about history, we came up with the idea that this morality must come from an outside source or a god. My main point here is that just because many people share the same sense of morality doesn't mean that it makes it objective. It's the same thing as if everyone in the world decided that blue is the best color, and if everyone in the world agreed that blue is the best color, then that would make blue objectively the best color. If we think about this logically, it doesn't make much sense, because how can blue be objectively the best color? Is it because it's shared by everyone subjectively? Then is the basis for objectivity just shared opinions of everyone in the world? This is why I believe objective morality isn't actually objective. It's just the fact that everyone believes in it that we think it's objective. And as explained earlier, why everyone believes in it is because through natural selection and through having used these morals in order to progress, we've ingrained it into our psyche that these are objective and these are something that weren't just agreed upon by human beings. As we look back in history, we can see how these morals have changed throughout time. One of the things that we can all agree on is that slavery is bad. Slavery is objectively horrible. Viewing someone as property is horrible. But many ancient societies didn't think this about about people outside of their tribe or group. That's why they believed it to be moral for them to enslave these people and treat them as property, because they didn't view them as part of their in-group. They didn't view them as people. And again, the main reason for this was empathy. Empathy is the key to all the morality here. These groups, these tribes were not connected to one another. They were warring with each other. They were always battling. They always viewed the other side as an enemy. So that reduced the amount of empathy they had for the other people. But as society became more interconnected and we started working together more, we realized that these other people are not much different from us. We realized that we can have empathy towards these other people. This argument of objective morality doesn't work when the same objective morality was used by these ancient people to enslave people around them. Now, speaking about objective morality, one of the biggest bases for objective morality is divine commandment theory. This is basically the theory that God gets to decide what is moral, what is good, and what is wrong. And many times it is said that if it comes from God, then it is good because God is good. But there's just a lot of issues with this kind of ethical framework. The first problem is just inconsistent revelation. Now, we can't act like all religions are sharing the exact same sense of morality here. Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, they're all sharing different kinds of morality or moral codes. Now, they may share something in common like the golden rule of how you should treat everyone as you treat yourself, but that is just coming from basic empathy. That's not coming from divine revelation. So then we have to get into the nitty-gritty of what is actually moral in these religions. And that's when we see the subjectivism of what is moral and what is not. For example, in the Old Testament, we see that if you get slaves from foreign nations, it is totally fine as long as you don't treat your fellow Israelite ruthlessly. Or that it was deemed more important that God would command that we don't mix fabrics together than him telling us that we should stop slavery. If you think about this in the naturalistic view of how these people were subjectively making up their own morals by calling it morals from God, a lot of this stuff makes sense because the slavery was benefiting these people. They didn't want to get rid of the slavery, so they made their God tell them that it's okay. It's okay as long as it's from foreign nations. Again, with the fact that these people had no empathy towards the foreign nations, but they had more empathy for their in-group, so they decided to make the laws for treating your fellow Israelite slave better than those of treating foreign slaves. Also, I want to make sure that we're not committing the fallacy of begging the question, which is when an argument's premise assumes the truth of its conclusion. So for example, if we were going to say that Yahweh's objective morality is true and someone asked us, okay, how do we know that it's true? And if we say that it says in the Bible that it's true, then that would be circular logic. That would be begging the question. Also, let's just say that there wasn't any inconsistent revelation. Let's just say that we had one objective morality being given to us by one God that everyone believes in. It doesn't seem very clear that we ought to follow what God is telling us to do. He can give us commandments, but there's no objective reason why we should follow those commandments. Whether we should follow those commandments or not are completely subjective to where you grew up, what the culture is at the time, what most people find acceptable. And this happens often with Christians in the Bible. They say that they seem to cherry pick which verses they are going to follow from the Bible and which verses they are going to throw out because of the progressed morality of the time. And if you want to argue that we have reason why we should follow God's commands, then what would that reason be? Is it because God commands us to follow his commands? Then why should I follow those commands that he commands that I follow his commands? Is it because that God is good? Then why should I follow what's good? Because God commands them? Then why should I follow what God commands? And soon it turns into a circular argument. There's actually a great video that Alex O'Connor made on this. I'll link it in the description. You guys can go watch it. And then another problem with this divine commandment theory is one that was raised by Socrates thousands of years ago. And it's called the Euthyphro dilemma. And this came up when Socrates was having a conversation with Euthyphro, who believed that the gods are giving us the divine commandment, the divine objective morals. And Socrates asks Euthyphro, does God command things because they are good, or are things good because God commands them? This dilemma creates a huge problem for divine commandment theory in the fact that either way you answer, there's going to be problems with that answer. So let's say that God commands things because they are good. Then this must mean that objective morality is outside of God, something outside of God that God hadn't created. They just exist without God. Therefore, we would have no need for God to tell us these things because these objective morals would exist anyway. Now, the more problematic response would be things are good because God commands them. Then this is where it gets problematic because then we can say, oh, God commanded this, therefore it's good, which has been very problematic in the history of humanity because it has been used to commit countless atrocities in the name of God. It's actually one of the ways that many Christians defend the Old Testament and all the genocide and slavery that goes on, is that because God commanded it, then it is good because God is goodness. And this becomes a huge issue when we look at passages like Leviticus 25:44 through 46, or Numbers 31:7 through 18, where we can now say that these things are immoral, but we have to say, based on this commandment theory, that they are good things because of the fact that God commanded them. Now, the objection that many people will raise to this type of thinking is that how we can even judge that these past moral actions were immoral without having an objective sense of morality. And to that I would respond, we can judge these things based on our progressed modern sense of morality. So as a species, as we've become more interconnected like the internet and travel, we've realized that these other human beings out there are just like us. We can have empathy towards them. So therefore, this has increased our sense of morality. This has increased our potential to want to do good things for the people outside of our group or tribe. If anyone in today's society was born in the ancient Israelite society, for example, where they had not had this progressed sense of morality, they would be totally fine with anything that's going on within their larger society. We can only judge these things in history as immoral because of the fact that we have a progressed sense of morality. Because we realized throughout history that this is causing so much suffering. This is not following our intuitions of empathy towards other human beings. And we can see the example of this progressed sense of morality in terms of how there were no vegans back in the day. This is an example that I like to use that can show that our sense of morality is something progressive, something subjectively progressive, rather than an objective truth that always is the same. So right now in society, we don't think that animal suffering is a big issue. And we might justify it with the fact that, oh, we need meat in our diet, or we need proteins in our diet. But I would argue, what if we could get all of the nutrients we need without having these meats? Would you still eat meat? And I would think many people would say yes, because it tastes good, or because of the overall satisfaction of eating meat. And at that point, you would be doing something immoral, because you're essentially saying that your taste buds are more important than the life of an animal. And again, sometimes we might justify these things with, oh, the animals don't feel as much pain, or they don't really feel pain like we do. And I just believe that to be a lack of empathy. The same as with the lack of empathy towards the slaves that people used to own back in history. Our empathy has not developed far enough towards animals to know that we are causing them suffering, just like how ancient people had not developed their empathies enough to realize that these people outside of their tribe are suffering, and that they're not just properties to be used. And if we just imagine that humans one day will have a source of nutrients that will not require killing animals, think of what those people would be saying looking back at what we're doing now. They would say how immoral that these people killed all these animals just for good tasting food, just because of the fact that they thought they could not survive without these meats and proteins. And that would be yet another step in our sense of morality being progressed. Now this is all important because you might ask, okay, why should we follow our sense of empathy? What's the point? If there's no objective morality, there's no point that we should follow our empathy. And to that I would say, I think the one thing that every human can agree on is that we all feel pain. This is a big part of Sam Harris's objective moral argument, is that every human can understand that pain is a thing. And pain and suffering are the real things that we're trying to deal with when we're talking about morality. And when we're talking about morality, we're trying to reduce pain and increase conditions which let us thrive. So that's why we should follow our sense of empathy, because we have all agreed that pain is something bad. So the logical conclusion from that is we should also think that other people think this pain is bad. So therefore that should incentivize us to follow our sense of empathy and not cause pain to others. The biggest part about this whole objective morality conversation is just empathy. And when someone who believes in God says that, what is your reasoning for not committing murder? What is your reasoning for not stealing from someone? They just come off as extremely psychopathic because of the fact that they have no understanding of how empathy actually entices us to act morally, and they think that everyone should be following the commandment of a God. So that would logically lead me to think that these people are only being good because of some imaginary God being commanding them to be good, which is a very scary thought if that's the only thing keeping you from doing bad things. And most of the time, this view of objective morality is just simply easier to think about compared to that of thinking how we subjectively developed our morality throughout history. It's just easier to say that, oh, these things exist because we all agree on them, and that means it's objective. I think a really good explanation of this comes from Matt Dillahunty in his conversation with Jordan Peterson.
The thinking about morality is so difficult for some that it's just easier to say, this person told me, or this God told me, or this is the case. Because having to sit down and do the sort of life inventory to figure out, hey, what's best for us? I mean, even figuring out what the goal of the game is harder for some people, and so they accept and fall into these traps of like authoritarian models of this is what your goal is.
But that's pretty much my case for why morality is subjective and that has developed over time throughout human history because of empathy. Not because of the fact that there exists a objective, immaterial truth of morality, but because of the fact that throughout history we realized and our empathy grew towards one another, and we realized how we can reduce suffering and increase conditions which we thrive in. So yeah, that's pretty much the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Comment below, let's have a discussion on this topic. It's a very complex topic. We can go into a lot of nuances, so I would love to have a discussion on it. Hit that like button if you found this content useful, subscribe if you want to see more of this content, and thank you so much for watching.